Thank you, so much for inviting me. I do like to get out and do it in person once in a while, and not only for the reason that it's enjoyable to meet people who enjoy these histories, but because I inevitably get stories from people. People come up and say, I want to add to this, or I want to give you another story that's similar to that. So always gives me plenty, in the pipeline. So far I have done about 80 of these stories. They run on the local station, and they've been running about 6 years, and I can't even tell you when they run. They just kind of run it at random on Valley Public Radio. And then I do new ones all the time for Texas Standard, where I'm on their staff up there. I don't go to Austin, I just send them my sound files. And it's a pretty good gig because they let me do pretty much what I want. I have an editor, and they polish me up sometimes, and once in a while they'll say, we don't want to touch that. I'll give an example. I was doing one the other week where I was talking about, I was talking about what it is to be a gentleman, and I was using this great letter some of you I'm sure have read of that George Bush wrote to Clinton when they changed power at the White House. He left him this letter on the Oval Office desk, and it was very kind, and it was particularly kind given that it had been a brutal campaign, and he was a gentleman and wished him well and with great sincerity. But I was doing something on what it is to be a gentleman, and I was looking at transfer of power. And so I had two examples. I had the one of George H.W. Bush being kind and gentlemanly to Clinton, and I also had the example of Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox, but they didn't want to touch that. They said, no, we don't want to touch the Robert E. Lee because they're taking his names off of buildings, and I said, well, you can't erase history, and it's a great story. Oh, yeah, we're trying, yeah. So anyway, I'm delighted to come and talk to you in person. My father was a great lover of Texas. My family goes back 4 generations in Texas, all the way to the Alamo. And he was the one, I think, who first introduced me to this notion of Texas pride through humor. I was about 10 years old when he told me this joke. He said, there was a guy from Kentucky talking to a guy from Tennessee. And the guy from Tennessee was bragging, Kentucky talking to a guy from Texas. And the guy from Kentucky was bragging about how much gold they had in Fort Knox. And he said, we have enough gold in Fort Knox to build a wall 6 foot high of solid gold all the way around Texas. And the Texans said, well, is that so? So I tell you what, you go ahead and build your wall, and if we like it, we'll buy it. So that was my first introduction to Texas humor. And we would call them today a meme, like you see on Facebook and Twitter and it's everything. And it's kind of sad to me, really, because the memes are moving from what used to be oral, the storytelling form, the narrative form, to the visual. It used to be, I'm sure all of you remember, someone comes, hey, I got a story for you. I got a joke for you. But now they say, have you seen this? So the oral is on the decline and the visual is on ascendancy. And that's one reason that I like telling these stories as a means of trying to preserve them. The other thing my father would always say to me was he'd quote John Gunther, who was famous for saying, son, don't ask a man if he's from Texas, because if he is, he'll tell you. Otherwise, no use embarrassing him. So this Texas pride theme went through my childhood, and my father wasn't one who, you might say, had drank the Kool-Aid. He was well-traveled, and he didn't make us believe that Texas was the only worthwhile place in the world to live, but he wanted us to understand it's a very special place, that it was a place that we should be proud of. And so henceforth, I learned from my father when we traveled, when people would ask him where he's from, he'd always say, I'm from Texas. If we're in Paris, he'd be saying, I'm from Texas. And people would say, but you're American. He said, yes, I'm American, but I'm Texas first. And I discovered that in my own travels that Texas is generally sufficient. Most people know where that is. So I like to say I'm Texan first and I'm kind of incidentally American. My father, one of the reasons I like to use this picture is one of the things my father and my mother did is they took us all around the state to see all of the contrast and beautiful places. And so I'm fortunate through my work to know a lot of great photographers from Texas Monthly. So I've collected some of their photographs here, and I'm planning on publishing a book later this year in November. So I'm talking to Texas A&M Monthly Press, Texas A&M Press, about publishing a book that would be a collection of 100 of my little historical, cultural stories, along with photographs like these that you'll see. If we could dim the lights, it'd be helpful a little bit to get the contrast there. He took us all around the state to see every part. Like this is up in the Panhandle. I don't think there's any more beautiful sunsets in Texas than West Texas. Something about the air and the climate. And this is out around Amarillo, where they say if you stand on a bucket, you can see tomorrow. You've heard that old saying that there's nothing between Amarillo and the North Pole but a barbed wire fence? It's a famous saying, that nothing between Amarillo and the North Pole but a barbed wire fence. And Admiral Perry, when he arrived at the North Pole, he said, famously, "Must be a cold day in Amarillo." It's, you know, they say Chicago is the windy city, but really it's Amarillo. Amarillo is the windiest place in America. And that's why they have a corollary to what I just said, that there's nothing between the North Pole and Amarillo but a barbed wire fence, and 2 of the strands are down. So we went to the hill country a lot to see the bluebonnets in bloom. A lot of these pictures come from Wyman Meinzer, who is the official photographer of Texas. Did you know that Texas had an official photographer? Yeah. Well, they never had that particular title before, but he had done 16 books on Texas landscapes, and so George W. Bush, honored him by just making him the national photographer of Texas. So that was kind of cool. But he's amazing. You see a lot of ads for the King Ranch pickups. You know, he does those. He does the still photos, not the television photos, but in magazines and things where you see those King Ranch pickups, and on the King Ranch he does those shoots for them. There's more. So if you haven't had the opportunity, I know a lot of you are winter Texans, so you may not be around when this is in bloom, but probably, I imagine you pass through central Texas when you go home, many of you, right? When the wildflowers are in bloom. And then, of course, you know, the beautiful beaches. So my father got us around to all of these places so that we could see them and enjoy them. And that's Santa Elena Canyon in Big Bend. One of the things that's, I think, somewhat special about Texas is that the flag is everywhere. You know, we put the Texas flag, you know, if you go to many parts of the world, you go to Oregon, you don't see the flag everywhere. You don't see people flying the Oregon state flag in their yards. And in Texas, about every 10th yard seems to have it, you know. And then we like to put it on everything. Welcome to Texas, y'all. One of the things I can tell you about Texas that is a surprise to me even is that I started a Facebook page. You see down there at the bottom, it says Stories from Texas Facebook. I started a Facebook page just as a place to park my stories. Say, I just need a place to kind of archive them, so I'll just start a Facebook page and I'll put them in. And I expected, you know, that I would have maybe 400 or 500 people bothering to follow this page. No. If there's anything Texans love, they love Texas. You know, I have 100,000 followers on that page. But it isn't because of the stories. The stories are rather minor. They're rather incidental to the page. It's because people began sending me photographs and unique stories about Texas. It was the audience itself that provides the content. And so if you want to join that page, please do, and you'll see a lot of photographs like this all the time. I try to spend time finding good photographs, or people send them, and so you see a lot of posts like this there, Texas Pride photos. See, we put the flag on gates. Anywhere it'll go, we'll put it. Love it on horseback. Now this isn't, this is just here to remind me to tell a story. It's another one of these Texas Pride stories. The story about a Montana cowboy who died and went to heaven, and he was getting the tour of heaven by St. Peter, and he was a little shocked because he looked up and he saw a jail. And in this jail there were a bunch of cowboys struggling to get out, trying to squeeze out between the bars. And he said to St. Peter, he said, I'm a little surprised to see a jail in heaven. And he said, oh, that's not the jail, that's the TDC, that's the Texas Detention Center. He said, the Texas Detention Center? He said, yeah. He said, these cowboys come in from Texas and we have to lock them up for a while. And he says, well, yeah, I did some droving with those boys. They can get to a new place, they can go wild, they can tear it up. St. Peter said, no, that's not the problem. He said, they get so homesick for Texas that they keep trying to sneak out the pearly gates and go home. So we have to keep them locked up a while until they get used to it here. So there's a lot of these stories about people dying and going to heaven or hell. And another one from Mark Twain actually said, Texas cowboy died, went to hell, and he found the climate so disagreeable that he sent a telegram home and said, please send blankets. Now, along the line of these Texas Pride jokes, I just use this as illustration. You know who this is, right?
Oh, yes.
Who? Robert Duvall. And Robert Duvall is an honorary Texan. He played, of course, the famous Gus McCrae in Lonesome Dove, the most watched miniseries in history, television history. And but this one is I just take it as an illustration for another story. One of the typical stories that are common in Texas folklore are the country bumpkin getting it over on a more educated, more sophisticated person, okay? So, and this story takes many forms. It's not my story, it's a folklore story, and there are many versions of it, but this is the Texas version of it, okay? A cowboy, looks somewhat like this, walked into a bank in New York City to ask for a $5,000 loan. And the loan officer looked at him and he thought, well, this guy is quite the redneck and probably kind of poor, so get rid of him quickly. He said, sir, do you have any collateral? And he said, yes, sir, I do. I have that 2016 F-250 pickup sitting across the street there, fully loaded, worth about $70,000 as she sits. And the guy kind of rolls his eyes and said, how much you owe on that truck? He said, not a dime, paid for. He said, well, changed his tune. I don't see why we couldn't loan you $5,000. Might be willing to go all the way up to 40, 50 if you need it. He said, no, sir, I just need $5,000. He said, do you mind if I ask you why you need the money? He said, well, I came up here from my ranch in Texas and I just came up here on business, but I suddenly have a unique emergency opportunity, you might say, to go over to Spain to look at some Andalusian horses. And, you know, I might just buy one if I can find enough money. Anyway, I'm a little cash poor at the moment. I need some walking around money. I figured they'll be there about a month. And the guy said, well, okay. He said, no problem. And then the rancher says, just one thing. He said, do we have to put a lien on the title? He said, because I imagine getting a New York lien off a Texas title is like herding cats. And he said, is there a way we might be able to skip that? And so the banker said, well, he said, you know, I'll tell you what. He said, you're not going to need that truck, right? You'll be gone for a month. He said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just keep it here as hard collateral. And the rancher thought, well, seems a little unusual, but all right. Slides the keys across. 10 minutes later, he has his money. He leaves. He goes to Spain, comes back a month later, gives him his $5,000 to the banker plus $28.37 interest. The banker walks him out while they bring the truck down from the garage. And the banker says, you know, while you're gone, I ran a credit check just for the hell of it. Turns out, you know, you're kind of wealthy. Said, you have 1,000 acres land in Texas. You have 500 cattle. You have oil and gas interests. Said, you didn't really need this loan, did you? And the truck pulled up about that time, and the rancher got in the truck, powered down the window, and he said, no, sir, I didn't. And the banker said, do you mind if I ask why you got the loan you didn't need? He said, where else is I going to park a big old 250 like this in New York City for just $28? He tipped his hat to him and said, much obliged to you. Now, there's many versions of that joke. You know, there's an Italian version, there's a Jewish version. It floats around, folklore changes according to need, but I think it originated in Texas. I don't know, can't prove it, but I prefer to believe it. Couldn't come to Mission without talking about Tom Landry, Mission's favorite son. A lot of people, even in Texas, don't know that he comes from Mission. And, you know, when he died, he's such an admired man, not only in Texas, but everywhere. It's a word that always comes up with him, classy. A classy man. And when he died on the same day that Charles Schulz died. You know, the Peanuts cartoonist. And in the New York Post, they ran this cartoon I've always loved that showed Landry and Carl Schulz walking into heaven together. And they had Landry had his arm around Charles Schulz like this. And he said, now, a few pointers about kicking a football. You know, just beautiful, very touching. I think if you were to ask most Texans to list the top 10 Texans, you know, of all time, I think you'd get a list that would look like this. It would be Crockett, Houston, Austin, Bowie, Landry, and on. I think he would be there. It's just astounding how much respect there is for him. Now,
excuse me, can I say something?
Yes,
real quick?
yes.
Many years ago, because I lived in California, my daughter was 9 years old, and she went to a John Wooden basketball camp in Thousand Oaks, where the Cowboys used to have their training.
Yes, yes,
and
that's true.
I told them, don't bother them because the Cowboys are here. So she went up and she told Mr. Landry, hey, Mr. Landry, my mom is from Mission, Texas. So they had a picture taken of her with him too.
How cool! How
and
cool!
Roger Staubach was the quarterback back then.
What a great story. That's wonderful. Well, when Landry died, I mourned his passing, of course, with millions of other Landry fans. And it was a day that was tough, and it was a day that was almost as tough as the day he was fired in 1989. And that day, too, hit me like a death in the family. Landry had been our coach since many of us were children. And when he was fired, we were 40. He had been our coach all through our formative years. And he had been our father on the field. He raised us within the game. He taught us to be gracious in victory and dignified in defeat. And with one stroke of Jerry Jones' pen, he was gone. It was devastating. Landry was known as the man in the hat. He was the stoic leader on the Dallas Cowboys sidelines. He was always impeccably dressed, sporting his fedora. Commissioner Paul Tagliabue said that if there was a Mount Rushmore for the NFL, Landry would be on it. And he would be on it with his hat. Incidentally, they tried to get Landry to wear a cowboy hat. And he said, you know, no, that would be a cliche. And also, strangely, he got in the habit of wearing the hat when he was an assistant coach with the New York Giants. And even there, he would always go impeccably dressed. And they said, why do you always dress up like that? And he said, well, I don't know that coaching will last forever. And so I want to, you know, look like a businessman. Maybe someone will hire me. And while coaching, Landry was so focused He rarely smiled. He was often called unemotional. But I can think of words that would be more fitting of a man like this, a man of character, honor, integrity, a man famous for his faith. And he was a man of pure class. He was ethos personified. Now I'm reading this because this is my radio script, and for someone like him, I like to get every word right, so I don't want to just summarize it. So in his 29 years as Dallas head coach, Landry led the Cowboys to more playoff seasons by far than they have had since. And here's another statistic that'll blow your mind, is the Cowboys still have not won as many games without Landry as they won with him, even after all this time. That's what you call a legacy. Under Landry, the Cowboys won 13 divisional titles. They played in 5 Super Bowls, winning 2. They enjoyed 20 consecutive winning seasons. That's why that last statistic is valid. And a record no NFL coach has come close to matching. Mostly because they don't stay that long, you know. He was their coach for almost 30 years. And as glorious as those years were, none equaled Landry's finest season in football. He played for the New York Giants professionally and was All-Pro 1 year, but that was not his finest season. He played football on scholarship for UT, but other than 1 semester, his career there was put on hold by World War II. He volunteered to join the Army Air Corps. He flew 30 missions over Germany, crash landing once in Belgium. And though the wings of the plane were shaved off of his B-17, he and all his men walked away without serious injury. Not bad for 20 years old. And that's something very few people know about Landry, that he served in World War II. He flew 30 missions over Germany and never, you know, in his way, never really talked about it. So someone asked him about it once. He said, well, there were some tough days over there. That was about it. One could consider that World War II service his finest season in a Churchillian sense. But in terms of football, we have to come all the way back to Mission, Texas to find his finest year. And when we come back to Mission, Texas, way down here in the Rio Grande Valley, we find that his finest season was his senior year, 1941. He played both sides of the ball here in Mission, Texas. He played defensive back and quarterback. They went undefeated that year. Landry led the Mission Eagles to a perfect 12-0 season. And they went all the way to the regional championship, which was as far as they could go that year because of the war. So the regional championship was as far as they went. But he had a perfect season. Here's another interesting thing. They beat everybody by a score of something to 0. Nobody scored on them all year except one time. There was 1 touchdown scored all year, and it was scored by Donna. And here's the fun part, is that it was scored on Landry. Landry was the defensive back, and they threw a touchdown pass into the end zone. Actually, the guy didn't catch it, but he got called for interference, and it was improperly put upon, they were improperly awarded the touchdown. The ball should have been put on the 1-yard line. But anyway, they awarded the touchdown. That was the only touchdown they made all year. Later, Landry's teammates made fun of him because they said, I don't know why you turned pro, why you got to turn pro and we didn't, because you were the weak link in our season. They didn't score on us. They scored on you. But anyway, the Mission Eagles won every game they played, holding every team scoreless except for 1. Landry's near flawless season and his impressive professional life thereafter were honored in '75 when the Mission School District named their football stadium the Tom Landry Stadium. And after he died in 2000, I-30 between Dallas and Fort Worth was named the Tom Landry Highway. And to me, one of the trivial truths about Landry that speaks to his greatness is that his Cowboys never gave him a Gatorade bath. They never dumped the Gatorade over him. I can't imagine that happening. You know, just too much respect there, I suppose. And after his coaching days were over, he developed a sterling reputation as an inspirational speaker. He was on the circuit. He always advised young players to keep their lives ordered in this way: faith, family, football. Faith, family, football. That's the way you keep your life ordered. And he was also fond of saying this: as of today, you have 100% of your life left. You have 100% of your life left, so get busy. He took his own words to heart too after he was fired, while the rest of us were using our energy being mad at Jones for the disrespectful way that our icon was sacked. Landry was moving on already. He didn't waste time on it. He didn't waste time being angry or bitter, and with characteristic optimism, he saw the silver lining. He just said, you know, as a boy growing up in Mission, Texas, I always dreamed about being a cowboy. And for 30 years, I was one. Let me get this. Can you find Waldo here? If you can't, this is me right here. The reason I'm showing you this picture is because this connects to Texas. In the 1990s, I was a Fulbright scholar in Africa. And it was while I was in Africa, as is true for many of us Americans and Texans, a lot of people, when they travel, they find a new love and respect for their own culture. And so by going to Africa to teach for a year in the jungles there, and I loved it. I mean, the students were great and everything. I always say in the third world, students dress up, and in the first world, they dress down. They look homeless, a lot of students today at universities. Say, you know, you want to give them money to buy some clothes. But anyway, I went to Africa on a Fulbright scholarship and taught there for a year. And what I found was that they knew a lot about Texas. They were fascinated by Texas. One of the first questions they asked me there in class was, Professor, why are they shooting Nigerians in Texas? And I said, we shoot everybody in Texas. We're just an equal opportunity state that way, you know. There's nothing personal. The reason they asked the question is because Nigerians in Houston, there's a large community, and you know, there's a few of them involved in nefarious activities, drug smuggling and stuff like that. So once in a while there'll be a story that'll show up in Nigerian papers, you know, in Nigerian. They like the word assassinated, so instead of saying a shot assassinated in Texas. But fortunately they had a great sense of humor too, so we got along well. But they just loved all these stories about Texas, and so in my own way I kind of came to life remembering all that my father had told me, and so when I came back I started, you know, collecting these stories, and it was still a number of years before I, you know, went on radio and started telling them and seeing, and then again I was surprised that people cared. So it was just like a lot of things in life, success comes accidentally. You know, you don't know that it's going to happen, you just kind of go along and do the best you can, and you find your place in the world. Now, I'm going to tell you how the first story came about through this. I was over here in Africa where I was starving to death because I couldn't find anything to eat that I liked. You know, I mean, I lost like 25 pounds in 6 months because I just didn't like their food. You know, they ate this gourd soup, and they ate, you know, strange fish, and they just had things that I didn't care for, so I didn't eat. I didn't eat much. And so when I had been there about 6 months, I received a letter, an envelope from a friend of mine back home, and I opened this envelope. It had a poster in it about this big. And I opened up and I looked at that poster, and this is what it was. That was about the cruelest thing my former friend could have done. So I went ahead and put it on the wall anyway, and I was Whataburger dreaming for about 6 months. And when I flew back into Dallas-Fort Worth at 11 p.m. at night, I got a taxi and I said, take me to Whataburger. And I got a double meat, double cheese. I supersized the fries. I supersized the milkshake. Got a Coke and 2 apple pies. The finest meal of my life. And I'm not alone in this. You know, people who who come back to Texas from overseas who are part of the military, they go straight to Whataburger. And they eat every meal they can there while here, and then until they have to go back. There are people who live, unfortunately, in Whataburgerless states. Sad life they have to live. And they'll sometimes drive from Nebraska all the way to Dallas just to get a Whataburger. They don't stay, they just come and get a Whataburger, take one to go, and go back home. And I know people in Texas who believe that there are certain Whataburger stores or a given one that makes the best Whataburger. You know, they're like connoisseurs. They're on the holy grail to get the Whataburger of Whataburgers. So they'll drive 60, 70 miles to get that favorite one from that favorite store. You know, Whataburger is a Texan chain. It started in Texas, started in Corpus Christi. It started as a New Year's resolution. So if you haven't made your New Year's resolution, use this as inspiration.
Go to Whataburger.
We'll go to Whataburger, yeah. Harmon Dobson was 1950 at New Year's, that year, New Year's Day, he said to himself, this is the year I'm going to open my burger restaurant. And he did. And just a little shack practically there on Air Street in Corpus Christi. And then from there it has expanded exponentially. It's in 9 states. It used to be in Mexico, but I think because of all the trouble, you know, they decided to retrench, pull out. But it is in 9 states, kind of all across the South is where Whataburger is now. Now, the way the name came about is that you will remember that in 1950, I don't guess all of you will remember, but some of you will remember, that burgers were small. You know, most of your White Castle and McDonald's, all those kind of small burgers. So in a time of small burgers, Harmon Dobson wanted to create a burger, as he said, that was so big it would take 2 hands to hold it, and so good that with one bite you would say, "What a burger!" And that's how it's got its name. And it was so. When I was a kid, my mom used to take me and my 2 brothers to get Whataburgers over in Kingsville. There were only about 3 Whataburgers at the time. And we'd go over there to Kingsville, and they were messy. You know, they're so big for little kids that she would put newspapers across our laps in the back seat so that we wouldn't get her protective plastic seat covers dirty. But we'd sit back there, I remember, with these newspapers and big old burgers and French fries, and it was great. And then she'd say, and if you eat all your burger, you get a chocolate shake. So that was beautiful.
See, when we were in high school, the only Whataburger was on 23rd and McAllen.
Uh-huh. Did you go often?
And you know, there's also one somewhere in Arizona.
Oh, yes.
Because a friend of mine, his son lives there. He says, oh, when he comes to see me, he always makes me Whataburger.
Yeah, there's one. When I was doing my doctorate out in Arizona in Tucson,
yes, there you go.
I remember, because I have a brother named Redneck Dave, we call him. It's a term of endearment and affection. He always likes to ask the question, what's the best Whataburger you ever had? You know, which of course, you know, it's always about how bad you wanted one. But you remind me of a case when I was hiking with a friend of mine, and he was also from Texas, but we were in Arizona, and we were up high on a mountain and looking over Tucson, and we had been hiking for 6 hours and we were starving. We get up there and we see like a beacon, the Whataburger sign, and I said, when we get down, we're going there. But I was glad they were there. But of course, now we have great arguments. People talking about what's better, the Whataburger or the In-N-Out burger, which is. But for most Texans, Whataburger is supreme. You see. There you go, Whataburger. This leads me to my next topic, which is the 10 words that Texans mispronounce the most. And this is one of them, Whataburger. I remember as a kid, that's the way I said it, and that's what I kind of thought it was somehow. Why water? You know, they were good, but I didn't know what the water was for, you know. So actually, one of the most popular radio commentaries I've done is this one on, for Texas Standard up there at the top of the Texas Standard is the network I work for. And I did it on the 10 words Texans mispronounce the most. And it got picked up by NPR National, and it got like 100,000 shares on social media. Again, I didn't expect that. You just never know what's going to carry, what's going to be popular. So I'm going to go through these words for you in case you don't know how to mispronounce them, okay? I call it mispronunciating in Texas. Of course, it's a dialect. Not everybody mispronounces all of them. Some do a few, some do a lot. So it's just fun to look at them. Barbed wire. Barbed wire. As a kid, I grew up working on ranches up in Brooks County. And I think I was probably 18, 19 years old before I knew that it was barbed wire. Because everybody said, barbed wire, we got to go to town and get some barbed wire. And sometimes they said the wire like war, barbed wire, barbed wire. Chester drawers. Well, that was another one, you know. I was practically grown before I realized it was chest of drawers. Before that, I just thought Chester made drawers and Bob made wire. I didn't know who Chester was. I thought he was famous for drawers. Probably, as opposed to probably. And some just forget the B entirely. They say probably. Probably. I reckon probably so. Height. There's no T in height. I mean, excuse me, there's no H in height. Yeah, a lot of Texans say height. What's his height? It's because they're confusing it with width and breadth. They're not necessarily making consistent. And so you'll hear a lot of people, even educated people, say height. And then they misspell it too, because that's the way they say it. Wash. You got to wash the truck. Now this is an old mispronunciation and actually is what you might call mispronunciated import. Because people who came to Texas, migrated from Tennessee and Kentucky, in those areas, they said this. My mother was one of them. I mean, it was her grandmother and her great-grandmother who came from there, and so she just inherited the saying. But they say George Washington and Washington, D.C., and so you'll find a lot of people with that heritage, but it isn't, shall we say, unique to Texas, because you'll find people in the Appalachian area who also say wash. What's interesting, library. I always say there's two kinds of Texans, those with the Texas accent and those who say they don't have one. I don't talk like that. Public library is an interesting mispronunciation. And, there's an old story about a Texan who goes to Harvard, and he hails this Harvard guy, and he says, hey, he said, can you tell me where the library's at? And the Harvard guy rolls his eyes and he says, here at Harvard we don't say library and we don't end our sentences in prepositions. The Texan says, oh, I'm sorry. He said, can you tell me where the library's at, jackass? So you see the continuing of that theme, the country bumpkin, putting it over. It's very Twainian too. I mean, Huckleberry Finn is all about that theme. We don't like his kind around here because he's a prevert. It's pervert, of course, but prevert would be someone learning to be a pervert. Now, this would be a pervert in training, getting a good education. And nuclear. Nuclear as opposed to nuclear. Can't let them Ruskies get more nuclear arms than we got. My boyfriend's taking me for granted. Granite. I think it's probably worse to be taken for granted than taken for granted, right? Doesn't and wouldn't. My brother, Redneck Dave, I was telling him not too long ago that some guy was embarrassed that he hadn't invited him to a barbecue or something, and I said, he's going to apologize to you. And he said, well, he doesn't need to do that because I wasn't going to go anyway. He doesn't need to do that. I wasn't going to go. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. It's supposed to be a dog-eat-dog world, but a lot of people get it as a dog-eat-dog world. I like dog-eat-dog world myself, don't you? It's the kind of world I'd like to live in, dog-eat-dog world. It's another good Twain quote. He said, you know, if you take a dog that's in poverty and you raise him up to prosperity, that dog will never in his life turn around and bite you. So, which is the principal difference between a dog and a man. Yeah, Twain said, he said, don't go thinking that you're going to earn your way into heaven. He said, you don't get to heaven on merit, you get there on favor. He said, if you got there on merit, they'd take your dog and they'd leave you out. Falfurrious butter. There's a great number of good Texas brands. You know, you've got Southwest Airlines, Dell Computer, you have Texas Instruments, you have the King Ranch. Now there's a brand that literally came from a brand. I mean, the thing cool about the King Ranch is it started out as scrub desert, you know, just almost worthless land. It was Robert E. Lee who told Richard King. Robert E. Lee was over here in Fort Brown in Brownsville, Texas, commander. He told Richard King, he told him, buy all the land you can up there in the Wild Horse Desert. It sold at the time for about 50 cents an acre. That's that land, you know, you're driving on 77 going north, that's all King Ranch almost. And so he did. He took that advice and bought all that land that he could, and then guess what? Oil. But he bought it before oil was important and raised cattle, which was the big industry of that time, and, you know, herded them up to Kansas. And then along came oil and gas, and now they have wind power. They happen to be sitting in one of the windiest corridors. So what a great and in some ways lucky piece of land, you know, because they keep converting to whatever is new. And then they took the brand of the King Ranch, and they have, you know, of course, the pickup, and they have a store online where you can buy all kinds of cool King Ranch chairs and beds and bedspreads. So they've literally taken something that started as a cattle brand and built a marketing brand, you know, worldwide with it. So very cool. Now, Falfurrious butter is interesting because Falfurrious butter is connected to the King Ranch in this way, is that when Lassiter up in Falfurrious wanted to start a dairy, he bought land from the King Ranch and cattle from the King Ranch to get it started. And this is back in really late 1800s, but the actual dairy didn't get started for some time because he needed to build up his Jersey cattle herd. And so opened the dairy officially in 1909. A lot of people wonder whether the town is named for the butter or the butter for the town, but the town came officially about a year before. And then what's interesting is that 35 years later, Lassiter, in financial trouble, sold the land back to the King Ranch. So the land he bought from them originally, he sold it back to them along with the cows. And that became the Encino division of the King Ranch, which exists still today. When you drive on 281 North, you go by the Encino division, which is literally half of my county that I grew up in. Brooks County is half King Ranch. But back to Falfurrious butter. Falfurrious butter no longer is made in Falfurrious. I know it's sad and it breaks your heart, but it isn't made there. It's made in Winsboro, Texas, but at least still made in Texas. In some ways, it kind of outgrew this small distribution area because it is sold in several states in northern Mexico. In fact, when I had a student some years ago from Saltillo, and he said that when he was growing up, his mother would bring him back the mantequilla dulce de Falfurrious as a special treat anytime she traveled to McAllen. And so the brand has, traveled quite widely. In fact, a soldier from Falfurrious, World War II soldier, said that when he was going on shore at Okinawa for the invasion of Okinawa, a Falfurrious butter crate bumped up against his knee in the surf. And he took it as a sign from God and Falfurrious that all would be well. And it was. Now that butter crate didn't float all the way from Falfurrias to, Japan. Falfurrias butter had a contract with the military, and so it probably just fell off a ship. But anyway, it's still a cool story. And the Falfurrias butter was a brand that also branded the town and branded the local team. The team was called the Jerseys because at one point Falfurrias had the largest Jersey cattle herd in the world. And so the team was named after those cows. There was a bumper sticker there actually. Once it was, watch your step, you're in Jersey country. But oddly, they didn't recognize the double meaning of it. They just took it as a straightforward, sports warning. And then after a while they said, oh, well, we better recall that bumper sticker. I think people are laughing at us. And so the butter today is in H-E-B and Walmart, and it's actually sells more today than it did way back then. It's more popular today, and it's growing at about 30% a year. So it's doing really very well, and I think my wife and I are responsible for a lot of that. Now I have to tell you that I'm also an export of Falfurrias. I grew up there, so even though I know on which side my bread is buttered, so to speak, I want you to know it doesn't affect the veracity of my story about Falfurrias butter. And it is a great butter, so if you haven't tried it, you should try it. Interestingly, in the Texas Standard's annual review or year-end review of their stories on radio, my Falfurrias butter story was a top 3 story for the year. And that surprised me too. I said, my God, you'd think it'd be Dr. Pepper or King Ranch, Falfurrias butter, really? But I think it's that every person in Falfurrias got the story and forwarded it. So rare did they get good news that they thought they would do that. And I'll tell you a revealing thing about me. It shows that I was a slow kid. Is that when I grew up in Falfurrias and I played sports and everything, we had these things called jerseys, and I thought they were called jerseys because we were jerseys. When you had a shirt called a jersey, I thought it was called that because we were jerseys. I thought other places they called it a bear or a tiger or something, So it took me a while to learn about barbed wire and Chester drawers and jerseys and all of that. All right. I have just 2 more. I know we're running a bit late, but I want to talk about my mom. My mom lived to be 101 and 5 months old. She died just 3 years ago. And she was, the reason I mentioned the months is because she said that once you got to be 99, you started counting your age like a newborn. You're 99 and 4 months, 99 and 8 months, 99 and 11 months. In fact, she said that if you want to live to be 100, the secret is you live to be 99 and then just be really, really careful. Be very, very careful. I always loved her name because it doubled for her as a mantra. She would always say to herself, Mary, be strong. And she was. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman, a daughter of the American Revolution, a daughter of the Texas Republic. She was a survivor of the Great Depression, an honest as the day is long woman of the Texas soil. I think she had what John Wayne called true grit. And I think anybody who lives that long, one in about 40,000, has got to have true grit. Because like they say, old age ain't for sissies. And I always want to know what was the secret of her longevity. Why did she live so long? And she lived a great life. She was fortunate. She just died of old age. She just wore out. That was all. And I think one of the secrets is she was always willing to try new things. She would never let the world leave her behind. She was never one to say, I'm too old for that. She called me when she was 90 years old, and you could hear her smile through the phone. She said, know what I did today? I said, no telling. She said, I bought me a computer. She said, I'm going to get on that internet thing and I'm going to learn about it. And she did. And so when she died, she had 115 Facebook friends. You know, most of them her relatives, of course. But she was one that she just would not be left behind. You know, she said, "I'm not going to say I'm too old. I'm going to do it." When she was in about 99, she wanted me to take her for a ride on my motorcycle. And I said, "Well, I'll have to strap you on with bungee cords." And she said, "That'll be fine." You know, she was always willing for that next adventure. She, at 100, I asked her once, I said, "If you could be 18 again for a day, what would you do?" And she said, "Oh, I'd run." She said, "I'd get out on that Galveston Island and I'd run till I ran out of island." Because that's what she missed. You know, she missed her mobility at that age. But she was mobile up until the very end. You know, she was just really in good shape and fortunate that way. When I was showing her my iPhone shortly before she died, the Christmas before, you know, she loved it. She said, "Oh, I've got to get one of those." But she didn't like it for the phone. She liked it for the 1,000 pictures in your pocket. She just said, "I can put all my grandkids in here and carry them around and show them to everybody." So she seized upon new technology with a great happiness and zeal. So that was good. She ultimately, she just never stopped moving. I think that's one of the reasons she lived a long time. She mowed her own lawn until she was 85. She never stopped gardening. She would be out there gardening and we'd say, "Mom, you're going to fall." She said, "Well, it won't be far." Because she had shrunk a good deal and she was near the ground. She said, "I love that. Won't be far to fall." And actually one time she did fall when no one was around. She fell off one of her step ladders and she told us about it later. And I said, "Well, why didn't you call somebody?" Because she said it took her about an hour to get up. And she said, "Well, I just needed time to catch my breath, you know." And I said, "But you have a medic alert bracelet, you know, why didn't you call somebody?" She said, "I didn't want to bother anybody." Let me see. She did her own dishes and her own laundry right up to the very end. She wouldn't sit down, you know. I was when I'd go visit her, I finally gave up. Because I'd say, "Mom, sit down," and she'd sit down just a minute, and she'd say, "Oh, wait, I got to put those dishes in the, you know, I got to put that laundry in." You know, she was always the Energizer bunny going. So I said, "Well, this is probably just good for her. Just let her do it. Let her do it, you know, her way." And she was one who would, she ate whatever she wanted, pretty much. You know, she had a bowl of ice cream every night before bed. And she loved Mexican food, and you might say to her, "Mom, you shouldn't be probably eating those enchiladas for cholesterol and all." She said, "Look, I've outlived all my doctors." And I figured I've outlived the advice they were giving me, so I'm just going to live my life and enjoy it. She had a Coke every morning, one Coke every morning as what she called her pick-me-up. So she just kind of, she never drank though, never had any alcohol, ate lots of salads. And she had great pride, and her measure of other people was always on the basis of what pride they took in themselves. She would say to me, "I don't much care what you do in life, but just make sure you live a life you can be proud of." And sometimes I think she was a little tough on people with this standard, because she came out to visit me when I was in doctoral school in Arizona, and she was quite shocked by what she called the shabby lawns out there. The people didn't have grass. And I said, "But Mom, it's a desert." She said, "Well, if they had pride, you know, they'd have nice lawns." She also was a great saver. You know, she was a librarian. And as her career, my father died 30 years before she did. And she just lived on, you know, this little pension. But when she died, she had $500,000 saved up. And I was shocked. Everybody was shocked, you know. She was just one of those children of the Depression where, you know, you go in her refrigerator, you know, you can't find the margarine because she's got all these margarine, you know, cups or containers that are holding stored food. She never threw anything away, you know. And she was one of those that when I'd go visit her, she'd say, "Oh, let's not forget to go by Dairy Queen and get our free slush. You know, the Astros won last night, so let's make sure that we get our free slush." So she just, was one of, like a lot of Depression people, always afraid that she would be without money. So she just socked it away. And I like that that my father once told her that he found a new house that he wanted to buy as $40,000 in 1960. And she said, well, we can't afford that. And he said, well, I can pay for half of it. I got $20,000. We can pay for half of it. She said, I couldn't sleep in a house I owed on. I couldn't get any sleep like that. So my ultimate story about her pride, though, is her feminine pride. She never lost it. No matter, she got up and when she's 101, I took her to the beauty parlor, as she still called it, the beauty parlor. I took her to the beauty parlor. I left her to get her hair done, and I came back to get her. And when I was driving her home, I said, Mom, you look beautiful. And she leaned over to me and she said, there's a lot of people think I only look about 90. Not a lot of women ever get to say that, And I'm going to leave you with a little video. It's about 3 minutes long.
Not long ago, I met an old rodeo cowboy in George West. We were discussing how you know if someone's a real Texan. He said, well, I think all you got to do is ask a few questions. Intrigued, I asked, like, what kind of questions? Well, he said like this. You ever seen the big Texas sun rise up over the oil derricks in the Gulf and turn into gold and found that beautiful? You ever laid back on Emory Peak under the starry skies of Big Bend and reached up and touched God's first day's work? Ever driven the country roads just to see the wildflowers celebrating spring? Or floated down the water loop with a cold beer on a hot summer's day? Ever eaten three-alarm chili and terlingua, tamped down with pan de campo? Ever eat a dilly watermelon and poteed strawberries and hill country peaches so good they made you cry? You got Bluebell in your freezer right now and a backup cord just in case? Is Southwest the national airline of Texas? Do you feel a gnawing sadness when you leave the state and a reborn joy when you make it back? Ever had beef enchiladas in the Riverwalk, chicken fried steak and Abilene with cream and gravy, or a Shiner Bach and Shiner? Ever see Staubach or Aikman bring the boys back from the dead? Did you see Earl Campbell run like a blustery wind in the Astrodome? Or see Nolan Ryan pitch a heart-stopping no-hitter? Do you know that Houston is the world's doctor? Are you equally comfortable with Ola and Howdy? You like jalapenos on your Whataburger for breakfast? Ever take a date to Dairy Queen? Does Austin seem normal to you? Do you love the smell of orange blossoms on the March wind or purple sage after a thunderstorm? Is Lonesome Dove the best miniseries there ever was? Is your favorite president Sam Houston? Did you ever sit in reverent silence at the Alamo in gratitude for the gift they gave? Ever drive through the gritty haze of West Texas sandstorm, spurred on by ZZ Top? Ever been caught out in the open by a Blue Norther on the Llano Estacado? You love a second helping of Frito pie on the Friday night lights? Do you cheer the bronc rider and running back with equal fervor? Ever ridden your horse through the drive-thru? Ever go to spring break at South Padre and woke up face down in beer-soaked sand or partied in a border town till you couldn't find the bridge again? You have a Lone Star flag flying in your yard? Is HEB your pantry? You see yourself as Texan first and just incidentally American? Ever worn-out boots too long or been saddle sore? Or owned an old pickup that you knew was out of oil because it wasn't leaking any? You think mesquite makes everything taste better? Ever two-stepped to Willie in a dance hall that smelled of sawdust? When America the Beautiful plays, you think about Texas? Did you smile when you learned the Texas Capitol was taller than the national capital? Do you believe the piney woods are prettier than any forest in Colorado? You think Texas is about half the size that ought to be on the U.S. map? If you can say yes to most all of these things, he said, then you have the right, the honor, to proudly call yourself a Texan. I think the old boy had a point. WF Strong leaves the stories from Texas. Some of them are true.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. I brought some CDs. I have 22 stories on these CDs I brought because, like I said, I can only cover 4 or 5 here, and some of the ones I've told are there, but they're $20, I think, right?
You can find them. I can bring you a shirt.
Okay. Well, the only problem with those CDs, I had to kind of produce them on my own because I'm out of the others, but they do have pictures from the Texas Monthly photographers on them, and they start with that music because they all come off the radio, so they start with this music and end with it. So you don't want to try to listen to them all at once; you'll kind of OD on them. So 2 or 3 stories, that's good at a time. But thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. Any questions? Okay.
One question.
Yes, sir.
Would refurio qualify as one of those words that gets mispronounced?
Oh, yes, yeah, refugio. Often mispronounced. And also, it's also interesting to consider, you know, I don't know how they got the R in there, refurio. It's a gringo thing, you know, the gringos did it because they couldn't pronounce refugio. So that's why. But if you talk about what do you call people from Refugio, the Spanish would be kind of like refugiones or refugianos. And so that's another thing that's kind of tough when you start talking about demonyms are called and what you call people from various places. Because of the Spanish involved, it complicates matters when you try to decide what to call them. Like Falfurious, you would call them Falfuriosites in English, but in Spanish it would be Falfurianos.
You didn't say anything about the cotton fields, because I've been cotton since I was 8 years old. Until I graduated from high school in '65, so I was cotton fields all over the valley. I even picked cotton one time with Freddie Fender before I was.
Oh, is that right? Did you give him some lyrics?
No, because he used to come to the Rio Theater on Wednesday nights, the Noche de Aficionados, and he would always sing.
Oh, that's
With
great.
$5. That was
That's
great.
wonderful. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.